The sleet was 1,000 tiny needles, each one finding a weak spot in Grace's threadbare coat. She hunched her shoulders, pulling the collar tighter, but it was useless. The Boston wind, a cruel, invisible hand, shoved her forward, threatening to rip the cheap umbrella from her grasp. She was 24 and perpetually teetering on the edge of financial disaster, a state she'd learned to navigate with the precision of a seasoned sailor. Grace Bennett recited her budget in her head like a prayer. Tuition, rent, groceries, student loan interest, a relentless ticker tape of zeros and deductions. Her statistics scholarship was a lifeline, but one missed payment, one unexpected expense, and the whole delicate house of cards would collapse. Dignity, she often thought, was a luxury she couldn't afford, yet it was the one thing she refused to surrender. She drove rideshare late into the nights, her textbooks dog-eared on the passenger seat, every fare a tiny victory against the encroaching darkness of her debt. Tonight, however, Boston was winning. Her beat-up Civic, a faithful, if sputtering companion, had chosen the exact midpoint of a particularly nasty storm to cough its last. Not a gentle fade, but a violent shudder, and then silence. A sickening final silence on a deserted street in the North End, miles from her tiny apartment, with 0 bars on her phone and the sleet turning to a punishing rain. The last ride, a late-night delivery, had just cancelled, the notification pinging right as the engine died. No income, no car, no way home. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at her throat. She fumbled with the hood latch, her fingers numb, but it was pointless. The engine was dead. She slammed the hood down, a futile burst of frustration, then started walking. Every step was a fight against the wind and the icy puddles that soaked through her worn sneakers. She needed shelter just for a few hours, long enough for the storm to break, long enough to call a tow. A bus stop, a closed storefront, anything. Her eyes scanned the dark street, desperate. She spotted a narrow alleyway, barely wide enough for a dumpster, between 2 old brick buildings. It wasn't much, but it offered a sliver of respite from the direct assault of the wind. She ducked into it, pressing herself against the damp, cold brick, shivering uncontrollably. The alley was dark, smelling of rain and something else she couldn't quite place. Old coffee, maybe, and faint cigar smoke. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to conjure warmth from nothing. Her teeth chattered. Just then, a door creaked open at the far end of the alley, a sliver of warm, golden light spilling out onto the wet cobblestones. A man stood silhouetted in the doorway. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and even from this distance radiated an unnerving stillness. He wasn't hurrying, wasn't flinching from the cold. He just stood there, a dark, unmoving presence. He watched her. Grace froze. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She tried to make herself smaller, to melt into the shadows, but the light from the doorway seemed to pick her out, highlighting her drenched hair, her shivering form. His gaze was direct, unwavering, and utterly devoid of pity. It was the look of someone assessing, calculating, dangerous. He took a slow drag from a cigarette, the ember glowing like a tiny, watchful eye in the gloom. The smoke curled around his head, a phantom halo. She could feel the weight of his stare, heavy and inescapable. He wasn't a good Samaritan. He was something else entirely, something sharp and hard and rooted in the very fabric of this old, unforgiving city. The cold suddenly didn't feel like the biggest threat. Grace wanted to run, but her legs were frozen, heavy with cold and fear. The man took another slow drag, then flicked the cigarette butt into a puddle where it hissed, a tiny defiance against the rain. He stepped out of the doorway, his movements fluid, unhurried. He was closer now, and she could see the sharp cut of his dark suit, the expensive fabric somehow immune to the downpour. His eyes, even in the dim light, were unnervingly clear, fixed on her. They held no judgment, only a deep, unsettling observation. "You're stranded," he stated, his voice a low rumble. surprisingly calm against the storm's fury. It wasn't a question. It was a fact, delivered with the certainty of someone who knew things, everything. Grace swallowed, her throat dry. My car, it broke down. The words felt pathetically weak, exposing her vulnerability even more. She clutched her arms tighter, acutely aware of how utterly exposed she was, a rabbit caught in a predator's gaze. He took another step, closing the distance. The alley suddenly felt impossibly small. He didn't offer help, didn't ask if she was okay. His gaze swept over her drenched form, her worn shoes, the water dripping from her hair. No ride, no phone, no shelter. He listed her failures like items on a manifest. "You're in a bad spot, Miss Bennett." Her breath hitched. He knew her name. How? She hadn't said it. She hadn't done anything. Her mind raced, a frantic hamster on a wheel. Was he a tow truck driver? No, not with that suit. A cop? No. The menace in his stillness was too personal, too unchecked. This wasn't official. This was something else. "How do you know my name?" she demanded, her voice trembling despite her effort to sound firm. A faint, almost imperceptible tilt of his head. "The North End is a small town, if you know where to look and who to ask." His eyes flickered towards the street, a silent acknowledgement of his reach. He wasn't just in this neighborhood, he was this neighborhood. Vincent Nash. The name, whispered in hushed tones around the city, suddenly clicked into place in her terrified mind. Mafia. That was the other smell in the alley. Power. Danger. He didn't wait for her to process it. He cut straight to it, his voice losing its detached observation, gaining an edge of cool pragmatism. "I have a problem. You have a problem." His gaze sharpened, locking onto hers. "I need a wife. For a month." Grace stared at him, numb with shock. The sleet, the cold, the broken car, it all faded into a surreal background noise. A wife?" she repeated, the words tasting like ash. This was insane. On paper, temporary, no strings beyond what we agreed to. He held up a hand, preempting her questions. "An arranged alliance is being forced on me. A month-long marriage to you, a complete unknown, will block it, break the contract." Her mind reeled. A sham marriage. To him, the man radiating danger from every pore. Her stomach churned. I can't. You're broke, Miss Bennett. Your scholarship is hanging by a thread. You're one missed payment away from being out on the street permanently." He wasn't guessing. He knew. The sheer invasion of privacy, the effortless way he'd peeled back her life, was terrifying, but also undeniably true. Every single word. "I offer you shelter, safety, for 30 days, a roof over your head, no questions asked. Enough money to cover your tuition, your rent, your car repairs, whatever you need to keep your scholarship and your dignity." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in, the impossible temptation of them. "All you have to do is marry me. On paper." Her breath caught. Shelter, safety, money. The things she desperately needed, the things she fought tooth and nail for every single day. One night of shelter was all she'd wanted, but he was offering a month of security. A month to breathe, to focus on her studies, to catch up. A month to escape the gnawing anxiety of impending financial ruin. But dependence. The word tasted bitter on her tongue. She was allergic to it. She'd clawed her way out of poverty, refusing handouts, building her life brick by painful brick. This wasn't a handout, it was a contract, a dangerous, unfathomable contract with a man who smelled of power and old money and unseen violence. He watched her, patient, unwavering. He knew she was desperate. He knew exactly what she needed. The sleet was still falling, chilling her to the bone. Her car was dead. Her phone was dead. She was alone, vulnerable, and utterly out of options. The offer, predatory as it was also a lifeboat in a raging storm. Her dignity screamed for her to refuse, but her shivering body, her desperate scholarship, her crumbling life screamed louder. She looked at him, really looked at him, searching for a flicker of deceit, a hint of malice beyond the obvious danger. She found only cold, calculating pragmatism, no lies, just a stark, impossible proposition. "A month," she whispered, the words barely audible over the wind. The thought was still terrifying, but the alternative was worse, much, much worse. Grace's whispered, "A month," felt less like a choice and more like a surrender to the inevitable. The wind whipped past, stinging her face, but she barely felt it. All she felt was the cold dread in her stomach, battling with the desperate hope that this impossible deal offered. Vincent Nash watched her, his expression unreadable. "Good," he said, the single word cutting through the storm. He didn't offer a hand, didn't soften. He simply turned, a silent command for her to follow. She hesitated, then her shivering body made the decision for her. She was soaked, freezing, and utterly defeated. She followed him out of the alley, his broad back a dark silhouette against the streetlights. He led her to a discreet door beside a closed bakery, one she'd never noticed despite driving these streets for months. Inside, it was a small, sparsely furnished office, warm and surprisingly quiet. A single desk, 2 chairs, and a lamp casting a soft yellow glow. The air smelled faintly of old paper and something clean, like lemon polish. Vincent gestured to one of the chairs. "Sit." Grace sank onto the worn leather, her muscles aching with relief at the warmth. She watched him, wary. He walked to the desk, pulled open a drawer, and took out a small, dark velvet box. He didn't open it immediately. Instead, he pulled a pen and a crisp white napkin from a dispenser on the desk. "The terms," he began, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. 30 days. You live in my house. You pose as my wife for any public appearances required. You say nothing about our arrangement to anyone. Ever." He met her eyes. "In return, you get shelter, complete financial security for the month, enough to cover your tuition, your rent, your car, anything you need to stay afloat academically, and protection from the storm and from anything else that might come for me in the next month." Grace's mind was still reeling from the sheer audacity of it, but the mention of financial security resonated deep within her. It was a golden key to unlock her future, a future she feared she was about to lose. "Protection from what?" she asked, her voice raspy. He paused, then pushed the napkin and pen towards her. "From a hostile takeover, a predatory marriage contract that would cost me more than just my freedom." He didn't elaborate, and she knew not to push. "This marriage blocks it." He opened the velvet box. Inside, nestled on white satin, was a ring. It wasn't flashy, not ostentatious. A simple platinum band with a single clear diamond, elegant and understated. It looked expensive. Too expensive. "This is borrowed," he stated, as if reading her mind. "For the duration. It will be returned." He picked it up, holding it out to her. "Put it on." Grace stared at the ring, then at his hand, then back at his face. The cold pragmatism in his eyes was unwavering. She felt a surge of defiance. "What about my studies, my classes? I can't just stop my life for a month." He nodded, a barely perceptible dip of his head. "Your schedule remains yours. Your academic pursuits are your priority. I expect you to maintain your scholarship. My protection extends to ensuring you can do that." He paused. "I will not interfere with your education. That is non-negotiable." A small victory. A tiny crack in the impenetrable wall he'd erected. She took a breath. "And what if people ask questions? About us? About how we met?" "We met through mutual friends at the university, a chance encounter that blossomed." His lie was delivered with such ease, it chilled her. "We keep it simple, we keep it vague, we smile, we don't overshare." She still hesitated. "And after 30 days? What then? Annulment, clean break. You walk away with your life intact, your debts cleared, your scholarship secure. I walk away free of a forced alliance. His gaze hardened. My word is my bond, Miss Bennet, especially on a contract like this. I will never lie to the woman I marry, even if it's just on paper. The words struck her, a strange, unexpected flicker of something almost like honor. He wouldn't lie to her. He'd lie for her, certainly, to the world, but not to the woman bound to him, even temporarily. It was a bizarre, dangerous code, but in that moment, it was the closest thing to reassurance she could hope for. She looked at the napkin, then at the ring. It was a Faustian bargain, but her options were gone, vanished with the sleet and the dead engine of her car. She needed this. She needed to survive. With a trembling hand, Grace reached out and took the ring. The platinum was cool against her skin, the diamond glinting under the lamp. It felt heavy, a tangible symbol of the impossible choice she was making. She slid it onto her left ring finger. It fit perfectly. Sign, Vincent instructed, pushing the napkin closer. 3 simple points handwritten in his bold, decisive script. 1. 30 days. 2. Public facade, private understanding. 3. Annulment upon completion. She picked up the pen. Her hand shook, but she forced herself to steady it. Her signature, usually neat and precise, was a little wobbly. It felt like signing away a piece of her soul, but it also felt like signing a lifeline. Vincent took the napkin, folded it once, and slipped it into his inner jacket pocket. "Good," he said again, his voice holding a note of finality. "Now, we get married." The ride to City Hall was a blur of flashing streetlights reflecting off rain-slicked streets. Vincent drove a dark, silent car, the kind that blended into the Boston night without a whisper. Grace sat beside him, the borrowed ring heavy and cold on her finger, her damp clothes clinging uncomfortably. Every fiber of her being screamed that this was wrong, utterly insane, but the memory of the sleet and her dead car was a colder, more immediate terror. She clutched her hands together, trying to stop the trembling that had started deep in her bones. They pulled up to a side entrance of a squat stone building. It didn't look like a place where lives were irrevocably altered, even if only on paper. It looked like bureaucracy, cold and unfeeling. Inside, a single tired-looking clerk sat behind a counter in a tiny, sterile office. The air smelled of stale coffee and cheap disinfectant. No grand halls, no ornate details, just fluorescent lights that hummed, casting a sickly yellow glow. Vincent spoke in low, firm tones to the clerk, his voice cutting through the mundane silence. He handled everything, his movements efficient, his presence commanding the small space. Grace stood beside him, a puppet in a play she hadn't auditioned for. She focused on breathing, on not letting her teeth chatter. Her heart pounded a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The ceremony itself was brief, almost perfunctory. A justice of the peace, a woman with kind eyes that seemed to hold a lifetime of secrets, read through the vows. They were standard, traditional words, meant for love and commitment, not for desperate contracts forged in the rain. Grace's throat felt tight, a knot of fear and disbelief. When the justice paused, looking at her expectantly, Grace's mind went blank. "Do you, Grace Bennet, take this man?" The words hung in the air, heavy with unintended meaning. She looked at Vincent. His profile was sharp, unyielding. He didn't look at her, but she felt his silent expectation, a pull she couldn't ignore. I do," she managed, the words barely a whisper. They felt alien, borrowed, like the ring on her finger. Then it was Vincent's turn. His voice, usually a low rumble, was clear and steady as he repeated his vows. He didn't stumble, didn't hesitate. He looked directly at the justice, his eyes devoid of any emotion that might betray their charade. "My word is my bond, Miss Bennet, especially on a contract like this. I will never lie to the woman I marry, even if it's just on paper. His words from the alley echoed in her mind. He was technically not lying to her, only to the world. A cold comfort. As they approached the small metal-topped table to sign the register, the clerk reappeared, holding a small bouquet wrapped in damp tissue paper. "Congratulations," she mumbled, pressing it into Grace's hands. It was a pathetic thing, a few wilted white roses and some limp greenery, clearly an afterthought from a forgotten event. The petals were cool and wet against Grace's fingers. The wet City Hall bouquet, a symbol of their strange cold union, utterly devoid of warmth or joy. She signed her name, her hand shaking slightly, the ink blurring on the cheap paper. Vincent signed after her, his hand firm, his signature bold and unwavering. She watched his hand, the strong fingers, the subtle flecks of muscle. An unexpected awareness, sharp and unwanted, pricked at her. He was dangerous, yes, but undeniably present, solid. "You may kiss the bride," the justice said, a gentle smile on her face. Grace's breath hitched. She hadn't prepared for this. Her eyes snapped to Vincent's. For the first time since they'd met, his gaze met hers directly, a flicker of something unreadable in his dark eyes. A question, an order, a challenge. The air crackled between them, thick with unspoken tension. He leaned in, slowly, deliberately. Grace felt a jolt, a strange mix of fear and an electric current. She braced herself, her heart hammering. His lips, surprisingly soft and warm, despite the cold pragmatism in his gaze, brushed hers. It was quick, chaste, a mere press of skin. Yet it sent a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with the lingering cold. It was a performance, she reminded herself, a necessary lie. But for a fleeting second, caught in the unnerving intimacy of his touch, she felt something shift, something dangerous and real stirring beneath the surface of their agreement. They pulled apart, the silence in the small office suddenly profound. The justice smiled. The clerk murmured another congratulations, but Grace felt none of it. All she could feel was the phantom warmth of his lips on hers, the strange, unsettling awareness of him. Stepping out of the sterile office, Grace felt an immediate sense of relief at the fresh, cold air, even as the rain continued to fall. She was safe, for now. She had shelter, financial security, and a name that was now, temporarily, linked to his. But the relief was tinged with a crushing weight. Her independence, her hard-won autonomy, felt like a distant memory. She had traded one cage for another, albeit a gilded, safer one. The sham marriage was official. The performance had begun, and the feeling of being utterly, completely lost in Vincent Nash's world was only just starting to sink in. The North End row house was nothing like Grace expected. Not a gilded cage, but a fortress of dark wood and quiet stone, nestled among others just like it. Vincent's car, a black shadow, pulled up to the curb, and she stepped out, clutching the damp bouquet, feeling utterly out of place. Her small apartment, crammed with textbooks and cheap furniture, suddenly felt 1,000,000 miles away. This house, even from the outside, exuded a silent, ancient power. Inside, it was even more imposing. High ceilings, polished hardwood floors that gleamed under soft, recessed lighting. Heavy, traditional furniture that looked like it had been there for generations. No clutter, no personal touches that spoke of warmth or home. It was immaculate, almost sterile, yet undeniably lived in. Vincent led her through the expansive living room, past a formal dining area, and up a grand staircase. Her worn sneakers felt loud on the polished wood. "Your room," he stated, opening a door at the end of the hall. It was a spacious room, larger than her entire apartment, with a tall window overlooking a cobblestone street, a four-poster bed, crisp white linens, a large desk, and a private bathroom. "The master suite is at the other end. We maintain our distance." His words, direct and devoid of apology, solidified the unspoken rules. This was coexistence, a strategic alliance, not a shared life. Contract, not consent. She was safe, yes, but utterly alone within these grand walls. She nodded, unable to speak, a knot of exhaustion and disbelief tightening in her chest. He left her there, a quiet retreat, and she sank onto the plush mattress, the borrowed ring cold against her finger. The silence of the house was profound, broken only by the distant hum of city life. She was technically married, living in a mafia boss's house, and her car was still dead in the sleet. Her mind reeled. The next few days settled into a strange rhythm. Grace spent her mornings in the quiet library Vincent had pointed out downstairs, poring over statistics textbooks, the silence a stark contrast to the constant noise of her old apartment. Vincent was often gone or sequestered in his study, the door always closed. When he was home, she'd catch glimpses of him, men in sharp suits, hushed conversations in the living room, the clink of ice in a glass. She never heard shouts, never saw overt displays of power. It was all understated, controlled, a quiet authority that permeated every corner of the house. She watched him from a distance, piecing together fragments of his world. He wasn't the caricature she'd imagined, all brute force and shadowy threats. He was precise, pragmatic. She saw him on the phone once, negotiating calmly, his voice low, but the tension in his shoulders was palpable. He was protecting something, she realized fiercely. His workers, his family business. It wasn't just about him. He moved through his world with a quiet confidence that was both intimidating and, she grudgingly admitted, fascinating. One afternoon, she needed to go to the university library. The rain had returned, a steady drizzle. She stood by the front door, feeling the familiar chill of dread. Her cheap umbrella was still in her broken car, and she couldn't afford another. Just as she was about to brave the downpour, Vincent appeared at the top of the stairs, a dark silhouette against the light. "Going out?" he asked, his voice unexpectedly close. She startled. "Yes, the library." He descended the stairs, his gaze sweeping over her. He didn't comment on her lack of umbrella. Instead, he simply walked to a small antique stand by the door, opened a narrow drawer, and pulled out a bright red umbrella. It was new, still with the plastic wrap on the handle. He extended it to her. "Take this," he said, his expression unreadable. "It's raining." Grace stared at the vibrant red, a stark splash of color in the muted house, then at his hand. It was such a small gesture, so practical, yet it hit her with an unexpected force. A moment of simple kindness, entirely unasked for, from the man who had bought her for a month. Her heart gave a strange lurch. "Thank you," she managed, taking it. Her fingers brushed his, a brief electric contact. The red umbrella felt solid, surprisingly heavy. It was a symbol, she realized, of his strange, dangerous brand of protection. He might be a mafia boss, but he made sure she wouldn't get wet. As she walked out into the rain, the red umbrella held high, she felt a sliver of warmth spread through her. It was still a contract. He was still a man of shadows, but the absolute dependence she dreaded felt a little less suffocating when it came wrapped in unexpected moments of care. The boundaries were clear, but the lines, she realized, were starting to blur in ways she hadn't anticipated. The strange rhythm of Grace's new life in Vincent's house began to fray at the edges. The quiet authority that permeated the North End row house now felt less like a sanctuary and more like a cage. She still spent hours in the library, her textbooks spread before her, but her focus was splintered. Every creak of the old house, every distant siren sent a jolt of unease through her. She was no longer just the broke grad student. She was Vincent Nash's temporary wife, and that name, she was learning, carried a heavy, dangerous weight. One afternoon, she was heading downstairs for a glass of water when she heard voices from Vincent's study, the door usually kept firmly shut. It was a murmur of low tones, but one voice, sharp and urgent, cut through the wood. "They know about her, boss. They're asking questions." Another, deeper Vincent's, was a quiet command, then a frustrated sigh. Grace froze on the landing, her heart thudding. They, the rival crew, the predatory marriage contract. It wasn't just theory anymore. Later that week, a black sedan, too sleek for the narrow North End streets, began appearing. It would park discreetly a block away, sometimes for hours. Grace saw it first from her bedroom window, then again when she ventured out for a quick walk to a nearby cafe. The windows were tinted, but she felt eyes on her, a cold, unseen pressure. Once she looked up suddenly and caught a flicker of movement behind a newspaper in a parked car across the street. The paper dropped instantly, but not before she registered the dark, intense gaze. Her blood ran cold. The target, she realized with a sickening lurch, wasn't just on Vincent, it was on her. The illusion of safety shattered. Her classes, once her escape, now felt like another vulnerability. She started leaving the house less, preferring the stifling, watchful quiet of Vincent's home to the perceived threat outside. Her academic performance, usually impeccable, began to suffer. She missed a deadline for a minor assignment, something unheard of for her. The fear was a constant hum beneath her skin, making it impossible to focus. Vincent found her one evening in the library, staring blankly at a complex equation, a cold cup of tea beside her. He leaned against the doorframe, a dark silhouette. "You're distracted," he observed, his voice calm, but with an underlying edge. Grace flinched, then slowly turned. "I heard things," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "And I've seen things. The car, the whispers." She looked at him, demanding an explanation. "It's real, isn't it? The danger?" He pushed off the doorframe, walking closer. His eyes, usually unreadable, held a flicker of something that looked like regret. "The situation has escalated," he admitted, his honesty a sharp blade. "My aunt's people are more aggressive than I anticipated. They're trying to verify the marriage, to find a way to discredit it." His aunt. The name hit her with the force of a physical blow. Not a rival crew, but family. The betrayal felt even colder, more personal. "Your aunt wants to take over your life." Vincent nodded, his jaw tight. "And my businesses. Specifically, the laundromats I've established for the community. She sees them as a drain. I see them as a duty." He paused, his gaze hardening. "The marriage stands in her way, and now that she knows about you, she'll try to find a weakness." Grace felt a wave of nausea, a weakness. She was the weakness. Her stomach clenched. "So, she's looking into me, my past, my real life. She's looking into anything that proves our marriage is a sham," Vincent confirmed, his voice low. "Which is why you must maintain the facade, and why I must ensure your safety." He walked to the window, looking out at the darkened street. "You are under my protection, Grace. No one will get to you." His words were meant to reassure, but they only served to underscore her absolute dependence. Her carefully constructed life, her independence, her scholarship, all of it was now a pawn in a dangerous game she barely understood, a game orchestrated by Vincent's own family, and she was utterly, irrevocably tied to him. The red umbrella, once a comfort, now felt like a stark reminder of the dangerous, gilded cage she was trapped in. The sham marriage was no longer a temporary reprieve. It was a target on her back, making the next 20-some days stretch into an eternity of fear. The revelation of Vincent's aunt as the true adversary had twisted the knife in Grace's gut. Not a faceless rival, but family. It made the danger feel dirtier, more insidious. She spent the next morning holed up in her room, trying to force herself to study, but her mind kept replaying Vincent's words. "She's trying to verify the marriage, to find a way to discredit it." And now that she knows about you, she'll try to find a weakness. Grace felt like a target, a fragile piece of glass about to shatter. The quiet calm of the house was abruptly broken by a furious shout from downstairs. It wasn't Vincent's voice, but a man's, raw with anger. Grace sprang from her chair, her heart leaping into her throat. She heard footsteps pounding up the stairs, then Vincent's deep rumble, sharper than usual, cutting through the other man's tirade. She crept to her door, pressing her ear to the wood. "Trash the place, boss. Windows gone, machines busted, and they threatened Marco's kid." The voice was hoarse, thick with outrage. "Marco's kid?" Vincent's voice was dangerously low, a predator's growl. "Yeah. Said if he didn't stop working for you, next time it wouldn't be glass they were breaking." Grace's blood ran cold. The laundromats, Vincent's charitable laundromats. His aunt wasn't just attacking his assets, she was targeting his people, his community. A chill, colder than the sleet, seeped into her bones. This wasn't just about money or power. It was about human lives. She heard Vincent move, then the heavy thud of a fist on a table. "Get me everything. Names, faces, car models. I want every single detail. Tell Marco I'm on my way, and tell him his family is untouchable." His voice was laced with an icy fury that made her shiver. This was the mafia boss she had first imagined, stripped bare of his quiet pragmatism, replaced by a primal need to protect. Grace retreated from the door, a sudden wave of nausea washing over her. She knew, instinctively, that Vincent was about to be pulled into active conflict. This wasn't a legal battle. It was a street fight, and his people, his workers, were on the front lines. She understood now, with chilling clarity, his code: protect workers. It wasn't a noble ideal. It was a fierce, unyielding command. A few minutes later, she heard the study door open and close, followed by footsteps heading towards the front door. She stayed in her room, pressing herself against the wall, listening. Vincent's voice briefly, giving instructions to someone at the door, then the sharp click of the lock and silence. The house was empty. He was gone. Grace waited, counting the seconds, then the minutes. The silence stretched, vast and oppressive. She walked to her window, peered out. Vincent's dark car was gone. The street was empty, save for the lurking black sedan a block away, its tinted windows glinting in the weak afternoon light. They were still there, watching. A profound sense of isolation washed over her. She was alone in this sprawling, quiet house, a temporary wife abandoned to the shadows. The previous night's fear had been abstract. Now it was concrete, palpable. She was completely dependent on Vincent for her safety, and he was gone, pulled into a dangerous conflict she couldn't comprehend. She walked through the silent house, each step echoing on the polished floors. The heavy furniture, once grand, now felt like a cage. She tried to go back to her studies, but the words blurred on the page. All she could hear was the imagined crash of glass, the threat to Marco's child. Vincent's world, once a distant, abstract concept, had violently intruded into her own, painting her with its dangerous colors. Her phone, fully charged and finally working, sat untouched on her desk. She could call someone, anyone. But who? What would she say? "I'm staying in a mafia boss's house because I married him on paper, and now his aunt is attacking his laundromats, and he's gone to deal with it, and I'm terrified." The words sounded insane even in her head. She was truly alone, locked into this precarious bargain. The red umbrella, still hanging by the front door, felt like a cruel joke. He might have protected her from the rain, but he couldn't protect her from the storm brewing inside these walls, or from the one that raged outside, now that he was gone. Her vulnerability was absolute, her dependence a suffocating weight. She was a pawn, left exposed on a chessboard she barely understood, waiting for the king to return. The silence of the house pressed in on Grace, thick and suffocating. Hours bled into each other, each tick of the grandfather clock in the hall, a hammer blow against her frayed nerves. Vincent was gone, swallowed by the dangerous shadows of his world, and she was left alone with her fear. She paced her opulent room, then ventured into the library, unable to settle. Her mind, usually a precise instrument for statistics, now raced with a frantic, unproductive energy. His aunt. The word echoed, a chilling whisper. Not a nameless, faceless rival, but family. It twisted the knife of betrayal deeper, making the threat feel personal. Grace knew very little about Vincent Nash. Only the hushed whispers of his name, the cold pragmatism of his offer. But she knew enough to recognize that his aunt's actions, trashing laundromats, threatening children, were not the actions of a legitimate business competitor. This was ugly. This was brutal. She found herself in Vincent's study, a room she'd never dared to enter. The door had been left slightly ajar. Curiosity, a powerful antidote to fear, pulled her in. The room smelled of old leather and cigar smoke. His desk was meticulously organized, but on a corner she saw a stack of business papers. Nash Community Laundromats was printed at the top of several documents. She picked one up, her fingers trembling. It was a quarterly report, detailing profits and expenditures. Her eyes scanned the numbers, a familiar comfort in the chaos. Then she saw it, a line item for community outreach programs that dwarfed typical operating costs. These weren't just businesses, they were genuine charitable ventures. He wasn't just protecting his assets, he was protecting a lifeline for the North End. A flicker of respect, sharp and unwelcome, pierced through her fear. He hadn't lied about his code to protect his workers. He just hadn't told her the full scope of his fight. He hadn't told her who he was fighting. She felt a surge of indignation. He'd kept her in the dark, treating her like a fragile pawn who couldn't handle the truth. Was she truly safe here if he wasn't fully transparent? The question gnawed at her, a bitter seed of doubt. The sun had long set, plunging the city into a cold, wet night, when Grace heard the front door open. Her heart leapt, a mix of relief and fresh anxiety. She rushed to the top of the stairs, peering down. Vincent stood in the entryway, shedding his heavy coat. He looked exhausted, his shoulders slumped. A dark bruise bloomed on his left cheekbone, and a thin line of dried blood marred his temple. He moved stiffly, favoring his left side. The danger was not just abstract anymore. It was etched onto his face. He looked up, his eyes meeting hers across the dim hall. They held a weary resignation, but also a flicker of something she couldn't quite decipher. Surprise, perhaps, that she was still awake, still waiting. "Are you all right?" she asked, her voice a reedy whisper. The question was involuntary, a genuine concern pushing past her fear. He nodded, a curt movement. "As all right as I can be." He started up the stairs, his gaze fixed on her. As he got closer, she could see the tension around his mouth, the exhaustion in his eyes. He stopped a few steps below her, close enough for her to see the dried blood, close enough for her to smell the faint scent of rain and something metallic. Blood. "What happened?" she pressed, unable to stop herself. He sighed, running a hand through his hair, a gesture of raw weariness. "My aunt's people made their point. They escalated." He looked directly into her eyes, his gaze steady despite his injuries. "The laundromats were hit again, more damage, more threats, and they're looking for any angle to discredit this marriage. They know you're the weak link." Her breath hitched. The weak link? The words stung, even though she knew they were true. "Not because of who you are," he clarified, his voice softening slightly, sensing her hurt. "Because you're new, unknown. They're trying to find any inconsistency, any sign that our arrangement isn't legitimate." He paused, his gaze hardening. "They sent someone to your old apartment today, asking questions. Your landlord called my people concerned. Grace felt a sickening lurch in her stomach. Her old apartment, her landlord, the last vestiges of her independent life, now exposed, now tainted by this dangerous charade. They know about my past. They know I'm broke. They know I'm a student. They know you're vulnerable, Vincent confirmed, his voice grim, and they will use it. This isn't just about blocking a takeover anymore, Grace. This is about protecting you from the fallout of being tied to me. A cold, hard truth settled in her gut. The sham marriage, a temporary solution to a desperate problem, had now become a full-blown target. Her name, linked to Vincent Nash, was a beacon for danger. The stakes had just soared, higher and more terrifying than she could have ever imagined. She wasn't just a guest in his world. She was deeply, irrevocably entangled. The 30 days suddenly felt like a lifetime, and the clean break he'd promised felt impossibly far away. She was in too deep. Grace watched Vincent descend the stairs, the bruise on his cheekbone, a stark testament to the world he moved in. Her stomach clenched. He was hurt. The danger was not abstract anymore, not a distant threat whispered in the dark. It was real, bloody, and pressing. He had called her the weak link, and the words still stung, but a different emotion, sharper and hotter than fear, began to ignite within her. Anger that she was a pawn, kept ignorant, left to cower in a gilded cage while he fought for something she barely understood. "You said your aunt is trying to discredit the marriage," Grace began, her voice cutting through the heavy silence of his return. She hadn't meant to sound so direct, but the words spilled out. She's looking for inconsistencies, for a sham. Vincent paused at the bottom of the stairs, turning to face her fully. He looked exhausted, but his gaze was unwavering. "Yes, what's your point?" "My point," she retorted, stepping down a few steps herself, "is that if she's looking for inconsistencies, then our performance needs to be flawless. And I can't give a flawless performance if I don't know the script, if I don't know what she's looking for." She gestured vaguely. "You deal in muscle and threats. I deal in patterns, in data, in finding the hidden connections." He stared at her, a flicker of surprise in his dark eyes. He was used to people cowering, not challenging him, especially not after what he'd just been through. "And what patterns do you suggest we look for, Miss Bennet?" His tone was laced with weary skepticism, but she detected a hint of curiosity. "The attacks on the laundromats," she said, her mind already racing, pulling on her academic training. "Are they random? Or are they strategic? Which laundromats were hit? When? Is there a correlation to their income? Or to the charitable contributions they make? To specific employees?" She remembered the quarterly report she'd glimpsed on his desk. "You're protecting your workers, protecting the community. Your aunt is trying to undermine that. Where does she hit hardest? Where does it hurt you most, beyond just the physical damage?" Vincent's jaw tightened. He walked past her into the living room, then turned, running a hand over his bruised cheek. "The attacks are targeted. The ones with the highest community involvement, the ones that serve the most vulnerable families, and always before a quarterly review." He looked at her, his expression shifting from skepticism to something more thoughtful. "She's trying to drive down their value, make them look like a liability." "Exactly," Grace said, feeling a surge of adrenaline. This was a language she understood. "She's building a case, not just with muscle, but with numbers. If she can show the laundromats are failing, she can seize them through legal means, claiming mismanagement." Her mind clicked. "She's using legal fronts, you said. What kind of legal fronts? Shell corporations, real estate holdings. She's not just a gangster, she's a corporate raider." He watched her, a slow, grudging respect dawning in his eyes. He hadn't considered the attacks from that angle, not with the cold, statistical logic she was applying. His methods were direct, hers were analytical. They were two different sides of the same coin. She uses a network of shell companies, real estate firms, and a non-profit organization that's anything but, he admitted, his voice low. It's complex, designed to be untraceable. Untraceable to a street crew, maybe, Grace countered, her pulse quickening, but not necessarily untraceable to someone who knows how to sift through public records, corporate filings, someone who knows how to look for financial anomalies. She met his gaze, her heart hammering. You need to give me everything. Every financial record, every legal document, every shred of information you have on these laundromats, on her operations. I can look for the patterns she's creating. I can find the cracks in her legal fronts. Vincent stood silent for a long moment, the only sound the distant hum of the city. He was a man who held his cards close, whose power lay in his control of information. To give Grace access to his intricate world, to his vulnerabilities, was a monumental step. It was a test of trust, not just for her, but for him. You're asking to walk into the fire, Grace, he finally said, his voice grave. This isn't a classroom exercise. This is dangerous. If you find something, if you expose her, the target on your back becomes even bigger. It's already there, she countered, a fierce determination hardening her voice. You just confirmed she sent people to my old apartment. She knows my vulnerabilities. So let me make myself less vulnerable. Let me fight back with the only weapon I have, my mind. She took a deep breath. My scholarship, my future, my dignity, they're all tied up in this. If I'm going to perform, I need to understand the stakes. I need to understand her. He studied her, his dark eyes searching hers, looking for hesitation, for fear. He found none, only a stubborn resolve that mirrored his own. All right, he said, the single word heavy with implication. Tomorrow, after my meetings. I'll give you access to everything, but you tell no one, not a single soul, understood? Understood, Grace affirmed, a shiver running down her spine. It was terrifying, yes, but also exhilarating. She wasn't just a pawn anymore. She was a player, entering a dangerous game, but at least now she had a chance to understand the rules. Vincent Nash, the pragmatic mob heir, was trusting her with his secrets, and in doing so, he had just given her a dangerous, exhilarating taste of agency. Grace's brain felt like a supercomputer overheating. Spread across the grand mahogany table in Vincent's study were stacks of documents, financial reports for the Nash community laundromats, property deeds, shell company registrations, and what looked like internal memos. Vincent had given her access to everything, just as he promised, before retreating to his own work, leaving her to sift through the data. She'd been at it for hours, the scent of old paper and Vincent's lingering cigar smoke clinging to her. She'd started with the laundromat financials, cross-referencing attack dates with reported losses. The patterns were there, just as she'd predicted, targeted hits on the most successful, most community-involved locations, always timed to impact quarterly reports. It was calculated, designed to depress asset values. But as she dug deeper into the shell companies listed as potential buyers for distressed properties, something didn't quite add up. The legal fronts weren't just generic corporations. There was a subtle, almost invisible thread connecting them, a specific law firm used repeatedly for minor filings, a particular obscure trust fund listed as a beneficial owner in multiple places. It spoke of a single, highly organized intelligence behind the attacks, not a disparate rival crew. And that intelligence, Grace realized with a jolt, had deep, intimate knowledge of Vincent's operations. Too intimate for an outsider. She pulled up a corporate registration for one of the shell companies, Harborfront Holdings, LLC. Her eyes scanned the names listed as directors, and then she saw it. A name that made her breath catch, a name she'd heard Vincent mention in passing, a name that clicked into place with a sickening thud. Isabel Nash. Isabel, Vincent's aunt. Grace's hands trembled, scattering the papers. It wasn't a rival crew. It was family. The betrayal, the deep, ugly treachery, hit her with a physical force. She remembered Vincent's tight jaw, the weary resignation in his eyes when he spoke of his aunt's people. It wasn't just a hostile takeover. It was a coup orchestrated from within his own bloodline. The sheer audacity of it, the cold, calculating cruelty, sent a chill through her. She scrambled to her feet, clutching the document, and practically ran to Vincent's desk. He looked up, his expression unreadable. A pen paused over a ledger. "Grace, what is it?" She slammed the paper onto his desk. "Isabel Nash," she gasped, her voice tight with disbelief and anger. "Your aunt, she's behind Harbourfront Holdings. She's behind all of it, isn't she? The attacks, the legal fronts, the whole predatory takeover. It's her." Vincent's gaze dropped to the document, then slowly, deliberately, lifted back to her face. He didn't deny it. He didn't flinch. His jaw tightened, a muscle jumping in his cheek. "You found her," he said, his voice flat, devoid of surprise. He had known she would. "Why didn't you tell me?" she demanded, the anger bubbling over. "You let me think it was some faceless rival. This is your family. She's attacking your own people, your community." He leaned back in his chair, his eyes dark and heavy. "Because it's complicated, Grace. And because I didn't want to expose you to the full depth of this ugliness until I had to." He ran a hand over his face. "Yes, Isabel. She believes my charitable laundromats are a waste of family resources. She sees them as a drain on potential profits, an unnecessary risk. She wants to liquidate them, sell off the properties, and channel the money into her own legitimate real estate ventures." Grace stared at him, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place, painting an even darker picture. "She's trying to seize your legacy, your genuine philanthropy." He nodded, a grim line to his mouth. "She's using legal fronts to do it, making the laundromats look unprofitable, then swooping in to save them through foreclosure or forced acquisition. My marriage to you was meant to block her move, to give me time. She thought I'd be forced into an arranged alliance with her chosen family, giving her control from the inside." His voice was laced with a chilling contempt. "She doesn't care about the workers, the families who rely on those laundromats. She only cares about the bottom line and her own power." Grace felt a profound shift within her. The sham marriage, once a desperate bargain for shelter, now felt like a desperate stand against a far more insidious evil. Vincent wasn't just protecting himself. He was protecting his community, his workers, his code of honor from a betrayal that cut to the bone. He wasn't just a mafia boss. He was a shield. And she, the broke grad student, was now standing beside him, entangled in a familial war where the stakes were far higher than she could have ever imagined. The target on her back suddenly felt heavier, but also strangely clearer. She knew who she was fighting now. And for what? The revelation of Isabel Nash as the mastermind behind the attacks had ignited something fierce in Grace. The anger, once a slow burn, now blazed, fueled by the sheer audacity of the betrayal and the targeting of innocent lives. She wasn't just a pawn anymore. She was an intelligence asset, and her mind, her sharp, analytical mind, was her weapon. Grace stood over Vincent's desk, a map of Boston's North End spread out between them, dotted with the locations of his laundromats. He leaned back in his chair, watching her, his earlier weariness replaced by a focused intensity. "She's not just hitting random targets," Grace stated, tapping a finger on a cluster of red marks. "These are the highest performing locations, the ones with the most community programs, the ones that hurt you most symbolically and financially." Vincent nodded, a grim line to his mouth. She wants to dry up their resources, then swoop in with her redevelopment projects, claiming the Nash name is too burdened by these failed charities. Exactly, Grace pressed on, her statistical brain whirring. So we counter her on her own terms. She's using legal fronts, disguising her ownership. We need to expose those connections, prove the fraud. She looked up, meeting his gaze. Give me every financial record, every property deed, every corporate filing you have for those laundromats and for her shell companies. I can trace the money. I can find the patterns that prove malicious intent. Vincent hesitated, then pushed a heavy stack of binders across the desk. It's all here. Lawyers have been trying to make sense of it for months. It's a maze. Mazes have patterns, Grace countered, already pulling the first binder towards her. And patterns can be broken. She spent the next 2 days immersed in the data, the study becoming her war room, hours blurred into a relentless pursuit of truth. She cross-referenced bank transfers, matched obscure trust names to holding companies, and meticulously pieced together the web of Isabel Nash's financial maneuvers. The sheer scale of the deception, the cold calculation of it, made her stomach churn. It wasn't just a few bad deeds, it was a systematic dismantling designed to bankrupt and seize. Mid-morning on the 3rd day, Grace surfaced from the data, rubbing her temples. She had found a crucial discrepancy. A series of inflated invoices from a construction firm for renovations that, according to the laundromat manager's reports, had never actually happened. The payments were routed through one of Isabel's shell corporations. Clear, undeniable fraud. She found Vincent in the kitchen, making coffee, his movements fluid despite the lingering stiffness from his injuries. I found something, she announced, holding up a printout. Inflated invoices, phantom renovations. It's direct fraud, siphoning funds and making the laundromats look unprofitable. Vincent took the paper, his eyes scanning the numbers. A muscle in his jaw twitched. Which laundromat? The one on Hanover Street, Grace replied. The oldest, the one with the most community programs, the one Isabel hates the most. He set down his coffee. We're going there. Grace blinked. Now? Now, he confirmed, his gaze unwavering. You found the smoking gun. Now you need to see what it protects. The Hanover Street laundromat was a world away from Vincent's polished row house. It hummed with the steady thrum of machines, smelling of detergent and warm fabric. Children sat at small tables, coloring, while their parents folded clothes. An elderly woman laughed with a young mother over a shared basket. This was the community Vincent fought for, the one Isabel Nash sought to dismantle. Grace watched, a profound understanding settling over her. She saw the genuine relief on the faces of the workers when Vincent walked in, the easy familiarity with which he greeted them. He wasn't just their boss. He was their protector, their anchor in a volatile world. He spoke to the manager, a man named Marco, who confirmed the construction firm had never done any work, despite the invoices. His eyes were tired, but resolute. We're not giving up, boss, Marco said, his gaze firm. Not for you, not for the kids. Grace felt a surge of emotion. This wasn't just numbers on a page. It was real, vibrant, vulnerable life. Vincent caught her eye across the crowded room, a silent question in his dark gaze. She met it with a firm nod. She understood. Later, back in the car, the hum of the engine, a quiet backdrop, Grace felt a shift inside her. The fear was still there, but now it was overshadowed by a fierce resolve. This isn't just about your freedom, is it? She said, looking out at the rain-slicked streets. It's about protecting these people. Protecting what's right. Vincent drove in silence for a moment, then glanced at her. My code, Grace. Protect workers. Never lie to the woman I marry, even on paper. He paused. You're good at this. Better than any lawyer I've hired for this specific problem. The compliment, understated and direct, hit her with surprising force. It wasn't flattery, it was genuine recognition. She had seen him operate in his element, ruthless and protective. Now he had seen her in hers, sharp and analytical. They were a strange, dangerous pairing, forged in crisis. The shared purpose, the glimpse into the human cost of the aunt's greed, had deepened their bond in a way she never anticipated. The contract was still binding, but the trust that was growing between them, born of shared risk and mutual respect, felt far more real. The laundromat trip had solidified everything for Grace. She wasn't just a passenger in Vincent's dangerous world anymore. She was an active participant, a crucial piece of the puzzle. The quiet hum of the washing machines, the laughter of children, the tired but hopeful eyes of the workers. It all echoed in her mind, a powerful counterpoint to Isabel Nash's cold, calculated greed. This wasn't just about Vincent's freedom. It was about protecting real lives. Back at the row house, the atmosphere shifted. The quiet tension became a controlled urgency. Vincent moved with a renewed purpose. The study, once her private war room, now buzzed with activity. Lawyers, sharp-suited and intense, arrived daily, their briefcases clutched like weapons. Grace watched from a distance as Vincent orchestrated, his voice low but authoritative, directing the flow of information she had uncovered. They were preparing for battle, and her statistical analysis of the phantom invoices and shell corporations was their primary ammunition. She heard snippets of their conversations: injunction, preliminary hearing, evidence of fraud. The legal terms, once abstract, now painted a vivid picture of the confrontation to come. Her data, refined and organized, was now part of hefty legal binders, ready to be presented in a courtroom. A courtroom. The word sent a shiver down her spine. Then came the inevitable realization. Her analysis, her connections, her direct experience at the laundromats. It wasn't enough to just hand over the papers. Someone would need to explain it, to testify, to stand before a judge and a room full of strangers, potentially Isabel Nash herself, and lay bare the intricate web of deceit. And that someone, she knew with a sickening certainty, was her. Grace felt a knot tighten in her stomach. Testifying, it meant exposure. It meant answering questions, not just about the numbers, but about her. Her connection to Vincent, the sham marriage, her scholarship, her entire academic future could be jeopardized. Her independence, the very thing she guarded so fiercely, felt suddenly fragile, perched precariously on the edge of a witness stand. She imagined the scrutiny, the questions, the way her desperate situation would be dissected for weaknesses. She started practicing in her head, mentally rehearsing answers to hypothetical questions. How do you know Mr. Nash? What is the nature of your relationship? How did you gain access to these confidential documents? Each imagined question was a fresh wave of anxiety. She knew the truth, but the truth in this context was a dangerous weapon that could backfire spectacularly. One evening, after the lawyers had left, Vincent found her in the library, hunched over her textbooks, though her eyes weren't really seeing the words. He leaned against the doorframe, his dark suit blending with the shadows. "They want you to testify," he stated, his voice quiet, devoid of pressure. Grace looked up, her heart leaping. She had known it, but hearing it out loud made it terrifyingly real. "I figured," she managed, her voice barely a whisper. He pushed off the frame, walking closer until he stood opposite her across the table. His gaze was intense, searching. "Your testimony is critical, Grace. Your statistical breakdown of Isabel's financial maneuvers, the direct link to the laundromat attacks, it's the clearest evidence we have of systematic fraud." She swallowed, her throat dry. "And the risk?" He didn't sugarcoat it. "High. They will try to discredit you, to expose our arrangement, to prove you're an unreliable witness, or worse, complicit." He paused, his gaze softening, almost imperceptibly. "Your scholarship, your reputation, Everything you've worked for could be at risk. Grace felt a cold dread spread through her, but beneath it, a flicker of something else. Loyalty. To the workers, to the laundromats, to the quiet, dangerous man across from her who, despite everything, had kept his word and protected her. "You don't have to do this," Vincent said, his voice firm, leaving no room for misinterpretation. "I can find another way, a weaker one, but you are not bound to this. Your safety, your future, is paramount. My word, remember? No lies, no coercion." His words, meant to offer freedom, ironically tied her tighter. He was giving her a choice, true agency, in a situation where she had felt utterly helpless. He respected her, and in that moment, seeing the concern in his usually unreadable eyes, she realized how much she respected him. Grace looked down at her hands, then back at him. Her sham marriage was a lie, but her integrity, her fierce desire for justice, was not. She thought of Marco, of the children coloring at the Hanover Street laundromat. She thought of Vincent, standing against his own family to protect them. She could walk away, save herself, or she could stand up, fight back with the only weapon she truly possessed, her mind, her truth. A slow, burning resolve ignited in her gut. Fear was still a cold knot, but it was no longer paralyzing. It was a challenge. "No," she said, her voice stronger than she expected. "I'll do it." She met his gaze, her own unwavering. "I'll testify." Vincent studied her for a long moment, a flicker of admiration in his dark eyes. A silent understanding passed between them, deeper than any contract. She was no longer just a broke grad student seeking shelter. She was a woman choosing her fight, ready to stand on the battlefield of a dangerous man's world, armed with nothing but her intellect and a burgeoning, dangerous loyalty. She would prepare. She would fight. The courthouse loomed, a granite monolith against the bruised twilight sky, its windows reflecting the last slivers of day like vacant eyes. Grace clutched the strap of her bag, her knuckles white. Vincent had brought her here, to a side entrance, well after the normal business hours. The air inside was cold, hushed, smelling of old paper and sterile disinfectant. Every echo of their footsteps seemed amplified, bouncing off the polished marble floors and high, vaulted ceilings. He led her through deserted corridors, past heavy oak doors, their destination a small, unassuming chamber tucked away on an upper floor. This wasn't a public spectacle. It was a private, urgent battle, the injunction hearing against Isabel Nash. Grace's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She had prepared, rehearsed, but the sheer gravity of being here, in the belly of the beast, was overwhelming. Vincent paused outside the chamber door, his hand on the cold brass knob. He looked at her, his dark eyes searching hers. "Are you ready?" His voice was low, a steadying rumble in the oppressive silence. Grace nodded, though her throat was dry, ready, but terrified. She felt the borrowed ring on her finger, a cold, constant reminder of the impossible bargain that had led her here. She thought of the wet City Hall bouquet, the wilted roses, a poignant symbol of her forced union, now a weapon in this fight. He opened the door. The chamber was small, intimate, yet formal. A stern-faced judge sat elevated, flanked by clerks. Vincent's lawyers were at one table, a formidable array of sharp suits and grim expressions. Across from them, at another table, sat Isabel Nash, Vincent's aunt. She was older, impeccably dressed, with a severe expression that mirrored the judge's. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, flickered towards Grace for a split second, a dismissive glance that made Grace's blood run cold. Grace sank into a seat at the back, beside Vincent. The air was thick with tension. Vincent's lead lawyer, Mr. Thorne, was presenting, his voice calm and authoritative, as he laid out the evidence of financial fraud, inflated invoices, shell companies, the targeted attacks on the laundromats. Grace's analysis, her painstaking work, was being laid bare. She watched Vincent, seated beside her. He was still composed, a silent force. He listened intently, his jaw tight, his gaze occasionally flicking towards his aunt, then back to the judge. The legal arguments were strong, undeniable, but Grace could feel it, a subtle undertone of doubt, of something missing. Isabel Nash, for all the evidence against her, maintained an air of icy confidence, her expression unyielding. She projected an image of wronged innocence, of a concerned family member trying to protect legitimate assets. Grace felt a growing unease. The numbers were clear, but the human element, the why, was harder to convey through dry legal jargon. Mr. Thorne concluded, and Isabel's lawyer, a slick, aggressive man, immediately launched into his counter-argument. He painted Vincent as a reckless heir, mismanaging his family's legacy, and the laundromats as failing ventures. He spoke of unsubstantiated claims and unproven allegations, subtly undermining the weight of the evidence. He twisted the narrative, making Vincent seem like the villain. Grace's stomach clenched. He was good, too good. He made the fraud seem like a desperate attempt by Vincent to cling to power, to hide his own failures. And then he made a dismissive comment about the source of this dubious information, implying a biased, unreliable witness. That was it. That was the missing piece. They needed more than just numbers. They needed a voice. A clear, unshakable voice that could connect the dots, that could explain the intent behind the fraud, the human cost. They needed her. Grace looked at Vincent. His gaze was fixed on the judge, his expression unreadable, but she felt the frustration emanating from him, a quiet hum of suppressed anger. He knew it too. His lawyers had presented the facts, but the emotional truth, the moral weight, was getting lost in the legal posturing. Her heart pounded. This was her moment. Her choice. She thought of Marco, of the children at the laundromat, of Vincent's code to protect them. She thought of her own dignity, her fierce independence, now tethered to this dangerous, vital cause. She had chosen to be here, chosen to fight. This was her fight now, too. She pushed herself up from the seat, the sudden movement drawing every eye in the small chamber. Vincent's head snapped towards her, his eyes wide with a question, a silent warning. Isabel Nash's gaze narrowed, a flicker of surprise, then cold disdain. Grace didn't flinch. She walked, head held high, towards the witness stand, every step a deliberate act of courage. The weight of the borrowed ring felt like a challenge, not a burden. She would risk everything. She would expose the truth. She would give them the voice they needed. Grace walked, head held high, towards the witness stand. Every eye in the small, hushed chamber was on her, 1,000 invisible needles pricking at her skin. Vincent's gaze, a silent question and a warning, burned into her back. Isabel Nash's cold disdain turned to sharp, furious surprise as Grace took her place, her hand surprisingly steady as she placed it on the Bible. She swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. The irony was a bitter taste in her mouth, but her resolve, forged in the quiet desperation of her studies and the chilling reality of Vincent's world, was absolute. "State your name for the record." The judge's voice was clear, cutting through the thick tension. "Grace Bennett," she said, her voice stronger than she expected, echoing in the quiet room. Vincent's lawyer, Mr. Thorne, began the questioning, guiding her through the intricate financial web she had untangled. Grace took a deep breath, pushing down the fear, letting her statistical brain take over. She spoke of the inflated invoices, the phantom renovations that never happened, the money siphoned through shell corporations. She explained how these fraudulent transactions were systematically designed to deplete the laundromat's resources, making them appear unprofitable, ripe for a predatory takeover. She used simple, direct language devoid of jargon, painting a clear picture of calculated greed. "And what was the purpose of these actions, Miss Bennett?" Mr. Thorne asked, his voice calm, but with an underlying current of anticipation. Grace looked directly at the judge, then for a defiant second at Isabel Nash, whose face was now a mask of barely suppressed fury. The purpose was to destroy them, Grace stated, her voice unwavering. To dismantle a vital community resource, not because they were failing, but because they were succeeding too well at something Isabel Nash deemed unprofitable. To seize charitable assets under the guise of legitimate business practice. A murmur rippled through the small chamber. Isabel's lawyer sprang to his feet, objecting, but the judge waved him down. "And how do you know this, Miss Bennet?" The lawyer pressed, his tone challenging, hinting at her lack of authority. Grace met his gaze, refusing to flinch. "I spent days meticulously analyzing the financial records Mr. Nash provided. I identified patterns that clearly indicate malicious intent. I visited the Hanover Street laundromat myself. I saw the community it serves, the real people who depend on it. The fraud wasn't just on paper, it was an attack on families, on workers, on a neighborhood." She paused, her voice gaining a fierce edge. "To truly see the extent of this deception, Your Honor, I insist the charity books for all the Nash community laundromats be made public. Every single transaction, every donation, every expenditure. Let the community see how these vital resources have been managed and how they've been targeted." The demand hung in the air, a bombshell. Isabel Nash gasped, a sharp, choked sound. Her lawyer's face went pale. Public disclosure of the books would lay bare not just the fraud, but also the true, positive impact of the laundromats, completely undermining Isabel's narrative of mismanagement. Mr. Thorne's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of surprise and admiration. Vincent, seated beside him, had gone completely still. Grace felt his gaze, heavy and intense, but she didn't look away from the judge. Isabel's lawyer, recovering, launched into a frantic cross-examination. "Ms. Bennet, you are currently residing in Mr. Nash's home, are you not? As his wife," he spat the word out, trying to imply bias, complicity. "And you were a broke grad student, desperate for shelter, before this convenient arrangement, correct? How can your testimony be impartial?" Grace's stomach clenched. This was it, the exposure. She felt the borrowed ring on her finger, cold and heavy, but she had prepared for this. She took a breath, meeting the lawyer's hostile gaze. "My financial situation prior to this arrangement is irrelevant to the factual data I have presented. My analysis is based on numbers, on verifiable transactions, not on personal circumstances. And yes, I live in Mr. Nash's home because I married him." Her voice held no shame, only a fierce, unyielding conviction. "And in doing so, I saw firsthand what he stands for. I saw the good he does for this community. My impartiality comes from a desire for truth and justice, for the people who rely on these laundromats, not from any personal gain." She didn't deny the sham marriage directly, but she spun the narrative, emphasizing the reason for her involvement, the truth, the community. She had given him her loyalty. Vincent, watching from the table, felt a jolt. Her words were technically true, but the way she delivered them, the quiet fire in her eyes, transformed the pragmatic contract into something else entirely. He saw the admiration in Mr. Thorne's gaze, the dawning realization on the judge's face. She wasn't just a witness, she was a force. The judge leaned forward, his expression grave. "Ms. Bennet, your insistence on full public disclosure of the charity books, that is a significant request. It would provide undeniable transparency." He looked at Isabel's lawyer, whose face was now etched with defeat. "Given the compelling evidence of systematic fraud presented by Ms. Bennet and her call for full transparency, I am granting the injunction. Furthermore, I order a full, independent audit of all Nash Community Laundromat financials, with the results to be made public. A collective exhalation filled the chamber. Isabel Nash slumped in her seat, her face a picture of stunned defeat. Vincent's jaw unclenched. He looked at Grace, a profound mix of relief, concern, and a deep, undeniable admiration in his dark eyes. She had done it. She had risked everything, and in doing so she had not only saved his laundromats, but she had also exposed the truth, fiercely, brilliantly, and with a courage he hadn't fully anticipated. The climax had passed, and the truth, raw and undeniable, was finally laid bare. The judge's gavel struck, a sharp, definitive crack that echoed the finality of his words. Isabel Nash, a crumpled heap of expensive fabric and shattered ambition, stared blankly at the table. Her lawyer, defeated, began gathering his papers with a defeated sigh. Grace watched it all from the witness stand, a strange mixture of bone-deep exhaustion and exhilarating triumph coursing through her. It was over. The injunction was granted, the laundromats were safe, Isabel's legal fronts were exposed, and the full, independent audit would bring everything into the light. Vincent was instantly by her side, his presence a solid, reassuring anchor. He didn't say anything, but his hand, warm and firm, settled briefly on her arm, a silent acknowledgement, a shared victory. Grace felt the lingering adrenaline slowly recede, leaving behind a profound weariness. Every muscle ached, every nerve ending hummed. She had pushed herself to the absolute limit. Outside the courthouse, the night air was crisp and clear. The rain finally gone. Vincent's dark car waited, a silent sentinel. The usual lurking black sedan was nowhere to be seen. The threat, Grace realized, was gone, evaporated with Isabel Nash's defeat. She felt a lightness in her chest she hadn't known she was missing until now. The target on her back, the constant hum of fear, had finally dissipated. They drove back to the North End row house in a comfortable silence. The tension that had coiled between them for weeks had unwound, replaced by a quiet understanding. Grace felt Vincent's gaze on her a few times, but she didn't meet it. She was too busy processing, too busy feeling the profound shift inside herself. She wasn't the same broke grad student who had stumbled into that alleyway weeks ago. She had faced down a mafia boss's aunt, exposed a complex fraud, and risked everything she had. She wasn't allergic to dependence anymore. She had chosen to be dependent for a cause she believed in, and in doing so had found a strength she hadn't known she possessed. Back in the quiet grandeur of the house, Vincent led her into the living room, gesturing towards the plush sofa. "Sit," he said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. He walked to the liquor cabinet, poured 2 glasses of amber liquid she assumed was whiskey, and handed one to her. Grace took it, the warmth of the glass a comfort in her trembling hands. She took a sip. It burned, then settled, a slow warmth spreading through her chest. He sat opposite her, his gaze steady, unwavering. "You were remarkable, Grace," he said, the words heavy with genuine admiration. "You saw what my lawyers missed. You gave them the truth, and you made them listen." Grace felt a blush creep up her neck. Compliments from Vincent Nash were rare, but deeply felt. I knew what was at stake," she murmured, looking down at her glass. "For the laundromats, for those families." He nodded. "And for yourself. You risked everything." He paused, taking a slow sip of his drink. "My word is my bond, Grace. I promised you an annulment, a clean break." He reached into his inner jacket pocket, pulling out the folded napkin, the one with the 3 handwritten rules, and her shaky signature. He placed it on the coffee table between them. "The 30 days are up. The contract is fulfilled. You are free." Grace looked at the napkin, then at the borrowed ring on her finger, its diamond glinting under the soft lamplight. Free. The word, once so desperately longed for, now felt hollow. She was no longer just seeking shelter. She had found purpose and a strange, dangerous connection to this man. She had learned to trust him, to respect his brutal code of honor, to see the protective heart beneath the pragmatic exterior. He had given her agency, not by letting her go, but by giving her the choice to stay. Her scholarship was secure, her car could be repaired, her debts could be cleared. She could walk away back to her old life, a little richer, a lot wiser, and forever changed. But the thought of leaving, of returning to a life without this strange, intense man, without the quiet hum of his dangerous world, suddenly felt diminished. She had a voice now. She wanted to use it. She looked up, meeting his dark, intense gaze. "You kept your word," she said, her voice steady. "You never lied to me." He watched her, silent, waiting. "I don't want a clean break, Vincent," she continued, her heart pounding but her resolve firm. She reached for the borrowed ring, slowly twisting it on her finger. "I want a real relationship, on my terms, with clear boundaries, my own bank accounts, my own apartment if I want it, my own choices." She took a deep breath. "But I want to stay, with you. And I want to keep fighting for those laundromats, for that community, with you." Vincent's expression was unreadable for a long moment. Then a slow, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of his lips. It wasn't a smile of triumph, but of something deeper, something close to wonder. He reached across the table, not for the napkin, but for her hand, covering it with his own. The borrowed ring was cold between their palms, but his touch was warm, solid, and utterly real. "My code, Grace," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Protect workers. Never lie to the woman I marry, even if it's on paper." He paused, his thumb gently caressing her knuckles. "And never let a good woman walk away when she's finally found her voice." 2 years had passed since the judge's gavel sealed Isabel Nash's fate, and in a way, Grace's own. The initial whirlwind of interviews, audits, and legal fallout had eventually settled, leaving behind a new landscape for both Grace and Vincent. Grace's scholarship was not just secure, she'd excelled. Her statistical analysis skills now honed to a razor's edge, opening doors to prestigious internships she once only dreamed of. She still drove her Civic, now fully repaired, but it was a choice, not a necessity. Her dignity, once a fragile shield against dependence, now felt like an unshakable core, built from her own fierce choices. Vincent's world, too, had transformed. The independent audit had not only cleared the Nash community laundromats of any mismanagement, but had shone a spotlight on their genuine philanthropic impact. Freed from Isabel's predatory grasp, Vincent had expanded, opening 2 new state-of-the-art laundromats in underserved neighborhoods, each a testament to his quiet, unwavering code to protect his workers and community. He remained a man of shadows, his power undeniable, but Grace saw the unwavering integrity beneath it. He was a dangerous man, yes, but a good one, operating by his own brutal, honorable rules. Their relationship, born from a desperate contract, had become something undeniably real, woven into the fabric of their lives. Grace still lived in the North End row house, but it was their home now, not just his. Her study was filled with her books and her own personal touches, a vibrant contrast to the house's traditional grandeur. She had her own bank accounts, separate and fiercely guarded, a non-negotiable term in their unspoken post-annulment agreement. She often worked from a small office she rented near the university, maintaining her professional distance and independence, but always returned to him. Their days were a carefully orchestrated dance of separate lives and shared moments. She'd spend her mornings immersed in data, her evenings often joining him for quiet dinners, discussing everything from obscure statistical theories to the complex politics of the North End. There was a comfortable intimacy in their silence, a deep understanding that bypassed words. She saw the subtle shifts in his expression, the tightening of his jaw when a problem arose, the rare, soft curve of his lips when he watched her. And he, she knew, saw her, truly saw her, not just as a temporary wife, but as an equal, a partner in a life far more complex and dangerous than she had ever imagined. One evening, Grace sat on the sofa, a textbook open on her lap, but her gaze was fixed on Vincent across the room. He was on the phone, his voice low, discussing a new community initiative for one of the laundromats. He looked up, catching her eye, and offered a faint, almost imperceptible smile. It was a private moment, a shared understanding that needed no explanation. She thought of the borrowed ring, now tucked away in a small box in her drawer, replaced by a simple, elegant band Vincent had given her months ago, a token of a commitment chosen, not contracted. She thought of the red umbrella still hanging by the front door, a constant reminder of the day he had offered her shelter, a practical act of kindness that had blossomed into something so much more. Their relationship wasn't a fairy tale. It was a pact, a partnership forged in fire and tempered by mutual respect. There were boundaries, yes, crucial ones that protected Grace's fiercely held independence. But there was also an undeniable, passionate love, a quiet devotion that ran deeper than any legal document. She had chosen him, chosen this life, not out of desperation, but out of strength. She had found her voice, and in doing so, had found a love that understood power, embraced agency, and against all odds, chose to be real. The performance had ended, and the true story had just begun. If you enjoyed the video, tell us where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel to keep up with our content.